Hello everybody, welcome to the last panel of the day. I will be your moderator and chair for today. My name is Emma Matsei and I'm currently a student in a Chinese Studies Master at Leiden University in the Netherlands. I'm currently working on queer narratives in contemporary Chinese society through the analysis of homosexual experience in poetry. My presentation today in this very room was about the role of Chinese grandparents in Chinese queer family. I graduated from Kafouskari and Beijing Capital Normal University, both time in Chinese language, society, and literature, but enough about me. Let's start introducing our speakers for today. Our first one is Veronica Frigeni. She's an affiliate researcher at the Amsterdam School for Cultural Analysis and also a visiting scholar in Italian at the University of Cambridge. Soon she will be a visiting scholar in residence.
Right now.
Right now. Congratulations.
Thank you.
A visiting scholar in residence in gender at the Central European University in Vienna. Her works is within a variety of topics, from post-colonial ecofeminist literature to the another forthcoming publication, which is the abortion in popular culture and hybridity in life writing. She's also a co-editor for the forthcoming volume, Mothers and Life Writing. And on top of that, she was also commissioned to translate selected writings by Andrew O'Reilly on metronic feminism into Italian. Our second speaker today would be Michaela Hunter, who holds a Master of Science in Community Health Sciences at the University of Manitoba. She completed her undergrad studies at Winnipeg University, and they currently have a double major in rhetoric, writing, and communication and psychology. Wow. The master thesis focusing on primary healthcare needs and the experiences in underrepresented members of the 2SL LGBTQIA+ community. And finally, they work in measuring equity and generating action in cancer project, and they're currently investigating cancer care continuum experiences of social and gender minority. What a curriculum, if I might add.
And some brilliant recent news. Tell everyone.
I just got into the PhD program at the University of Manitoba. So.
Amazing, congratulations. And it's nothing. Last but not least, our final speaker of the day will be Daniela Crocetti, who is a research fellow at Bar Ilan University as part of the Reproduction and Parenthood Journeys of Intersex VSC People Qualitative Research Project that recently began last year. They have conducted extensive qualitative research on the VSC rights, patient group, and the historical construction of the gendered body. Previously, they were also a Maria Sklodowska-Curie Research Fellow at the University of Huddersfield, and they were conducting a project on intersex human rights and citizenship. So we will start with our first speaker, Veronica Frigeni today, and at the end we will have time for questions, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My paper today analyzes a sample of Italian mass media reactions to Marco, who was the first reported case of a pregnant transgender man in Italy that made headlines in January. Marco, a Roman transgender man, discovered just before his hysterectomy that he had been pregnant for 5 months, and he had almost completed the gender affirmation process and had already rectified his documents. My analysis was conducted inductively, so I used elements of grounded theory and frame analysis, and reports on Marco's story were tracked down on mainstream media websites and blogs through database searches. So clearly, there are further lines of development for such research, which could include analysis of other media sources like TV programs, podcasts, and social media posts, which I did not include for my paper today. So Only articles with the keywords Marco, gravidanza, trans, featured as news by Google and cross-checked with Perplexity were included, and a total of 45 entries were found. So I started by reading each article, taking notes on the arguments present, and then using ArtList, I created categorizations of themes and narrative strategies that were like common and recurrent in the articles, and compare and contrasted them with existing studies on the topic. So with very few exceptions, it can be argued that the representations of Marco's transgender pregnancy are characterized by three main features: a shared emphasis on exceptionalism, cisgenderism, and medicalization. So just to give you a little bit of a context to Marco's story, in Italy there are an estimated 400,000 transgender individuals according to the Istituto Superiore di Sanità, so the Health Institute. And the law 164 of 1982 previously mandated surgical gender reassignment as a requirement for accessing the legal process of registry office rectification. So this highlights how cisnormativity underpins gender identification laws. So sterilization was used as a tangible proof of the sort of a dichotomy between the right to gender identification and the right to reproduction. And clearly, it was a sign of biopolitical oppression and eugenics policies, stemming from the fact that transgender people are perceived as problematic, as threatening to the nuclear heterosexual family in terms of their reproductive capacity, and as well as unfit parents. In 2015 and 17, the Italian Supreme Court and Constitutional Court, respectively, changed the application of the law. So they established that transgender individuals no longer need to undergo genital organ surgery to apply for a gender change in official documents, which is precisely Marco's situation. So how is Marco's story told? Well, Lampe et al. In their study examining US media coverage of transgender reproduction since the very famous 2008 Thomas Beatty case, argued that, and I've put a quote on the slide, media representations frame transgender reproduction in ways that both create symbolic room for some forms of reproduction that do not conform to cisnormative demands for sex-gender congruency and maintain boundaries between cisnormative reproduction and other forms, as well as create a new script or ideal type of transgender selfhood. So the question is whether Italian media covering Marco's pregnancy also exhibit these characteristics. And in my opinion, they do. They often create symbolic space for transgender reproduction as an exception to the norm. They portray it as inferior to cisgender reproduction. And additionally, we'll see they rely on cliché narratives of transgender individuals as dysphoric, as born in the wrong body, as confused, as tormented. So, as I said, exceptionalism, cisgenderism, medicalization, and transnormativity are the three main features of these narratives of Marco's pregnancy. Exceptionalism creates this argument of a sort of symbolic exception to a natural, perceived natural rule. And there is this tendency to exceptionalize and render invisible trans reproduction through sensationalized coverage of pregnant men in narratives which are mostly produced for cisgender audiences. So hearing and reading statements such as Marco is the first ever in Italy creates the impression that reproduction is a cisgender phenomenon rather than a capability of anyone with biological ability to reproduce. So this framing, and I quote from Lampe, defines reproduction as a cisnormative phenomenon, but also makes room for transgender people within repronormativity by defining each example of transgender reproduction as the first time ever non-cisgender people ever produced biologically. End of quote. So we could say that this sort of normative gender frame adjusts to accommodate for transgender individuals, while maintaining its foundational norms by defining transgender reproduction as an exception. Many other countries and reported on first pregnant man story following the US. In the UK, there have been 2 such cases reported, one in 2012, one in 2017. And this type of reporting reflects a phenomenon which has been described as the shock of the new, which again highlights a tendency towards sensationalism and narrow, predictable narratives when media are covering transgender people. Yet, and I've put this quote on the slide because I found it brilliant, has argued by ideas, trans pregnancy is unexceptional. At the same time, trans pregnancy is exceptionalized. Reproductive institution constituted as something difficult and unfamiliar, and in so doing reinforce barriers that need not exist. In popular culture, biomedical institution, it is too often regarded as something out of the ordinary and burdensome. But people with reproductive organs capable of gestation, trans and cis alike, can become pregnant and gestate. So I'd like to give you some examples from these articles which I analyzed. I put the quote in Italian, but if you want, I can translate them into English. So exceptionalism is often conveyed through the use of terms as shock. So here you find already in the title from Libro Quotidiano, Marco la storia shock, so this shocking story. Or also the use of terms like raro, incredibile, so very rare, ultra raro, so ultra rare, almost incredible. So they create this sort of narration for which this pregnancy is incredible and again is exceptional, is exceptionalized. What I found particularly interesting, however, is the strategy used by La Repubblica, who is a very famous Italian newspaper, and it was actually the first newspaper to report the news, because they pursue a strategy that I think ranged from a partial to a most extreme attempt at de-exceptionalization. So here you see the very first article we wrote about the story, again, raro, so the use of a term rare, but it's tried to diminishing this idea by using the term possible. Again, another article the following day, un caso raro, raro eppure possibile. So it's very like iterating this idea, which is very rare, but yet it is possible. It is something that can happen. And there is another article, I didn't put it on the slide, but another article from La Repubblica, which includes an interview to a psychoanalyst who says, la transgenitorialità già esiste in particolare negli Stati Uniti. So she is trying to like de-exceptionalize Marco's story by putting it into a broader international context where transgender pregnancy already exists. And yet she observes, sarà uno shock da noi dove ancora sono senza diritti le famiglie omogenitoriali. So compared to the Italian political and legal scenario, however, it will be a little bit of a shock. I think that through this attempt of de-exceptionalize trans pregnancy, we can also have a look at how fumetti brutti represented the story of Marco. For those of you who are not aware with Fumetti Brutti, she is a transgender cartoonist and artivist, and in her vast graphic production, her depiction of Marco can be compared with the previous cover of L'Espresso, here in red, another Italian newspaper, in 2021. There, she declared that her intention was to represent a real body, so challenging the traditional and gender idea of pregnancy, its overlap with gender motherhood, and the idea of a gender binary, so as a dichotomy rather than as a continuum. L'Espresso in 2021 already told the story of an Italian transgender man who gave birth to his child, yet this happened before transitioning, unlike Marco. And there's also another difference between the two stories, because the man on the cover here is depicted as smiling and cuddling his belly, while on the other hand, we are told that Marco may be considering terminating an unintended pregnancy. But what I find particularly interesting is that the vision narrative that Fumetti Brutti presents of Marco's story, and which is published on La Repubblica on the 22nd of January, is this image on the right, which features clearly two bodies, a transgender man with scars from a mastectomy and a transgender woman with visible male genitalia. It portrays them in a very positive light, they possibly walking along the seashore, or maybe more tragically in a Italian communal swimming pool. The decision that Fumetti Brutti made on this case is not to portray Marco as the embodiment of a pregnant body, because, as I said, he may not desire to have a child. But more importantly, because this is not the focus. Instead, it is important to acknowledge the existing of transgender bodies as reproductive bodies, regardless of their desire for parenthood in biological or other forms. So this narrative is that of an activist who understands the complexity and nuances of the issues at hand. And the fundamental part of this issue is that there is no exceptionality or unforeseen circumstances with respect to Marco's pregnant body. Another very famous writer and intellectual here in Italy, Chiara Valerio, many of you will know her, again writes on La Repubblica on the same day of Fumetti Brutti's illustration that Marco e la sua gravidanza al quinto mese rendono evidente quanto la nostra politica si occupi e legiferi vanamente su questioni che sono già superate dalla realtà. So Marco's story makes evident how politics is dealing with a question that reality has already overcome. And I find particularly interesting this reference to reality as a sort of tangible proof that transgender bodies exist and can reproduce, because we'll see that in narratives, approaching this issue from a very different, if not opposing perspective, the reference to reality will be used as a proof against transgender individual. So moving to the second feature, which is that of cisgenderism. So this ideology, I call it this way, that assume and enforces gender identities that conform to the sex assigned at birth, is based on the limited and binary view of gender, which recognizes only two options. And very interestingly, it operates rhetorically through many different mechanisms. So one example might be that of misgenderism, which is the failure or refusal to use a person's correct chosen pronoun. But in case of languages such as Italian, also misgendering articles, for example, adjectives. So we have the majority of articles writing of Marco as incinta, so using the female adjective, whereas as a sociolinguist explains, we can with no problem talk about Marco as incinto, for example. Or in many articles is called a ragazza, so a girl, una donna, a woman. So all these are examples of misgenderism. On a slide, however, I've put another example of cisgenderism, which, comparing the Italian case to other international cases, turned out to be very specific to Italy. I mean, in terms of frequency of how it happened, because there is this huge confusion between sex, gender, and sexual orientation. So average, but even above average Italian people confuse and mixes the three. And so I've put two quotes from two different articles, so from a newspaper and from the Huffington Post, so blogs. And they say, la gravidanza sarebbe soltanto il frutto di un rapporto volontario con un uomo, un breve passo indietro durante il percorso intrapreso. So the pregnancy resulting from an intercourse with a man would be like a backstep during his journey of gender affirmation. Or again, se mentre si fa la transizione si ha un rapporto sessuale che la contraddice, qualcosa nella transizione psichica non è ancora compiuto. So again, this reference to a sexual orientation has colliding with gender identity and sex. So this confusion really It's something that you can easily find on Italian media. Other example of cisgenderisms, other mechanism, for example, treating gender diversity as a pathology, but I'll go back to that later, talking about medicalization, or presuming that sex equals gender and that there are only two genders. So, for example, there is an interview on the newspaper Dire to Assunta Moresi, who is a member of the National Committee of Bioethics, and she explains la transizione prevede un trattamento farmacologico e chirurgico e poi si procede con una rettifica all'anagrafe, ma i corpi restano come alla nascita biologica dal punto di vista genetico. Marco, lei, è rimasta donna biologicamente. So there is this sort of reference to a theory for which if you are born assigned women at birth, your cells are femininized. So that was like unbelievable from the member of the National Committee of Bioethics. And then, again, treating trans pregnancy as a taboo. And I've put two long quotes from this entry on the Huffington Post. Per me è difficile perfino scriverne, perché mi pare ovvio che chi concepisce un figlio è una donna, chi porta avanti la gravidanza è una donna, chi partorisce il figlio è sua madre. Non si tratta di un'opinione, si tratta della forza invincibile della realtà. So here you see the reference to reality used as a proof against transgender, which is precisely the opposite of what La Repubblica was doing. Or Marco è disforico, so medicalizing Marco. Una donna che vuole essere uomo is no longer a woman, but here presented as una donna che vuole essere un uomo. La disforia è un grave disagio, ma non è pazzia. Chi chiama uomo una donna incinta crede in qualcosa che non trova riscontro nei fatti, una fra le definizioni correnti di pazzia. I don't think I need to comment on this. But there is something even better in the following slide, because I think this is like a masterpiece. This is a masterpiece. This entry from the blog post Pro Vita e Famiglia, so pro-life and family, which is one of the leading pro-natalies and pro-family association in Italy. Already from the title, Marco, between quotation marks, è incinta e re è nudo, so the king is naked, I don't know. They show a certain uneasiness in dealing with a male name for what they think is a woman. So they continue to put Marco under quotation marks. And then they say, Marco, non sappiamo per quali dolori e fragilità, ha pensato di essere nata, sbagliata, in un corpo sbagliato. Purtroppo qualcuno le ha fatto credere che fosse vero. Or again, è stata vittima di un sistema ideologico incapace di accogliere il dolore, di indagarlo, di aiutare. Un'ideologia che trasforma il dolore in profitto. Where I think Italy is like the leader in this crusade against gender theory. And the Pope really did a service to me yesterday when they published a new document. Yes, I'm finishing. I don't remember the name, Infinita Dignita, something like that, saying that the gender ideology is one of the enemy of the Catholic Church. Again, with surrogacy, abortion, and a lot of other things, but the gender ideology is like a nightmare. So here in Italy, it turns out to be a nightmare. But this post is very interesting also because there is this reference to medicalizing transgender identities and transgender pregnancy. So these tend to overemphasize these narratives of disorder, of being born in the wrong body. And this creates an idealized trans subject that is seen as broken, as confused, as needing medical intervention. So this really emphasizes the model of medical gatekeeping that still persists in Italy. And I have to note that also La Repubblica, who, despite trying to de-exceptionalize this case, in many articles emphasizes the medical exceptionality of the situation. So they also are not so strong in de-exceptionalizing this story. And again, as I said, in Italy, and I make reference to a wonderful study by Eleonora Garosi in 2009, trans experience is considered a natural condition that expresses a mismatch between biological sex and internal self, but it is considered as a transsexual problem, and so to restore the balance between sex and gender, body and internal self, the medical apparatus is the only legitimate social actor. So this is like a nightmare situation. So I've put another quote again from DeLay, who emphasizes this idea of a drama, an unspeakable drama, which adds up to a great disagio, dysphoria, la complessità, la confusione. So you see also, and the choice of words out, they tend to create much more confusion, where actually things are much more easier. In concluding, I just want to briefly mention 3 points that are brought up by Marco's story, specifically in the Italian context, but of course also more broadly. So in Italy, but actually not just in Italy, we still have a very cisgender concept of pregnancy. So I think there is no human experience which is more gender than pregnancy, and I say that as a matter of two. And so we have to be careful, because pregnant trans men face complex negotiation in navigating the tensions between their masculine identity and the gender expectation associated with inhabiting a pregnant body. The second point is a still persistent conflation of pregnancy and motherhood. Again, very strong in Italy, but not just in Italy. And here I just want to mention one thing. Many articles, again making reference to Chiala Valerio on La Repubblica, says that Marco's stories pone questioni giuridiche perché Marco, a parto avvenuto, sarà madre biologica e padre legale. Well, this is wrong, because according to the Italian law, the person who gestates, who enters into labor, and who delivers the baby is the mother. So, according to the law, Marco will be a man and a mother. So that's very interesting, and I found a wonderful explanation by a lawyer, and I want to read a quote. It's in Italian, I'm sorry, but it's wonderful. It says, il diritto è già, Tommaso Gazzolo, è già da sempre queer, perché la sua tecnologia è di per sé antinaturalistica. Questo significa che la realtà giuridica non determina la realtà che assumiamo come naturale. Il fatto che Marco sia giuridicamente un uomo non dice nulla su ciò che egli veramente o realmente sia. Significa solo che assume la posizione di uomo per ciò che concerne gli effetti giuridici e analogamente per ciò che concerne la sua posizione di madre. Of course, Marco's story also tells a lot about the difficulties for those seeking abortion in Italy. So this is not a huge problem. Again, there is some specific heightened emphasis for transgender peoples, because we know they might need to pose like endocrinal intervention and so forth. So pregnancy may enhance feelings of isolation, for example. So I'm gonna steal 1 minute more and head with a quote from Rick Setar in a wonderful study on transgender reproduction in Australia, because as they argue, trans people are all too often framed as exceptional or marginal because cisgenderism frames them as such. Clearly, they can be exceptional and often really marginalized, but the point is that what is needed are ways of seeing trans people as part of a broader humanity united by resistance to inequality in all forms. Needed then is a sexual and reproductive justice that neither erases trans people's specific experience or needs, nor fails to attend to how cisgenderism actually produces them. So, thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Veronica, for this incredibly informing presentation. I'm sure we all enjoyed it. And now let's give the floor to Michaela Hunter for a sexual representation in family structures.
Oh, that's not mine. Spoiler alert for the next one, though, I guess. Excellent. All right, it's my very beautiful title slide. Okay, so as was mentioned, my name is Michaela Hunter. My pronouns are she, they, and I have a number of co-authors on this study. They're really awesome. They're all from across Canada and the United States as well too, and we're all kind of working on this topic area together right now. Before I get started, I will mention that throughout you'll hear me say the full acronym 2SLGBTQIA+. For those who are not from Canada, the 2S may be a bit confusing for people, but it refers to two-spirit people who are part of the LGBT community. It's a specific term that's used for Indigenous people who identify as a gender or sexual minority. For some, they're trans, for some they're non-binary, for some they're queer, for some it's a combination, but it's a very specific term used by Indigenous peoples in Canada, and it's positioned at the front of the acronym to remind us all that the Indigenous peoples of Canada, or what is now known as Canada, have always been there and have been there long before the forcing of colonial narratives and the gender binary and of heterosexual expectations. So just a little disclaimer. So a brief agenda, I'll be going over some key concepts, a little bit about the literature and some examples, and then some recommendations. I should have mentioned the title of my presentation, but basically I'm talking about asexuality and how it is or isn't, spoiler, it isn't, represented in couple and family therapy. As mentioned in the introduction, I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I had one whole slide in the entirety of my psychology education that talked about asexuality, and that is it. And that's not nearly enough, so we'll talk a bit about that. That's me. No longer a master's student, now a PhD student. I identify as being asexual. Now you know, Mom. That was just me coming out to my mom, no big deal. And I'm married, so that's kind of a spoiler alert about the concepts we're supposed to be getting into next. So the person who came up with the split attraction model, I have some issues with them, but the model is still something I quite like. So for split attraction, it means that for some people, sexual attraction and romantic attraction are two different things. So in society, we really take for granted that when we see two characters in a movie falling in love, when we have the fade to black sex scene, they're in love and we know it, the relationship is solidified. For some people, that's not the case. An asexual person may experience romantic attraction, such as myself. I identify as asexual, but I am married. I've been with the same person for over 10 years now, and I very much love him. On the other end, an aromantic person may still experience sexual attraction, but not be interested at all in romantic relationships. And then other people may experience not experience sexual or romantic attraction, and those people are commonly referred to as aro-ace, or aromantic and asexual. There's a tendency in a lot of literature and even in common just the LGBT community to assume that everyone who is aromantic is also asexual and vice versa, but that's not true. And that's what the split attraction model really talks about, is that for some there is a differing between those two concepts and they're not really connected. So what this really means is that romantic couples may comprise of one or more asexual people, including those who are seeking counseling. So here's a fancy little framework that I developed just to explain to my supervisors how all these concepts worked, because they didn't get it. So you don't really need to pay attention too much to the sex and gender aspect of it. It's more so the bottom two, which I have conveniently highlighted in bolder lines just for your viewing pleasure. So as we have here in the sexual orientation, it's the desire or lack of desire for intimate, emotional, and or sexual relationships with people with any sex or gender, multiple sex or genders. And then on the other side is romantic attraction, which is an attraction or a feeling related to the desire of a romantic relationship with a specific person. And as those little arrows show, the yellow one shows that you can experience romantic attraction, the purple one shows you can experience sexual attraction, and the pink one, which is in fact actually an exact combination of the hex codes for the yellow and purple, shows that you can experience both sexual and romantic attraction. It's not super professional, but this is just how I explain it to people. So as I alluded to a couple of minutes ago, or maybe seconds, who knows, allonormativity is the societal perceived normative experience of sexual attraction. So like I said, when you're watching a movie and you see characters who are having kind of a romantic connection, and then they have sex and they're like, okay, yeah, cool, they're in love. So we also assume then too that everyone who's in a romantic relationship is also engaging in sexual activity, and that's not always true. So some examples of that are things like equating sexual inexperience with immaturity, saying like, oh, you know, you just haven't met the right one yet, or like you don't really know what it's like you'll change your mind, don't worry about it. Medical professionals assuming that a lack of sexual activity is cause for concern. So for example, I have personally been to the doctor when my doctor, it's my old doctor, Mom, don't worry, I'm not seeing her anymore. But when she asked if I was sexually active, I said no. She offered me marriage counseling. Everything's fine, we're great. I don't need that, but she assumed that it meant that there was something wrong with our relationship and that we needed some sort of remediation in order to fix those concerns, hence kind of the idea of where this presentation came from. And then therapists assuming that having a healthy sex life is essential for their clients to have a successful relationship. So in a lot of the literature, there's a lot of talking about how you can also send your clients to like sex therapists who can help with that, so that if there isn't frequent and awesome sex for everybody, then the relationship is doomed to fail basically, and it's not. So a little bit more about asexuality. Here's a fancy spectrum of it. So asexuality being what we're talking about right now, and then allosexuality with the frankly really boring black, gray, and white flag, if you don't mind me saying, being at the other end. But there's a ton of identities that fall in between those, and we'll get to that on the next slide, I think. And then further to that, on the purple continuum on the bottom, there's it goes from sex repulsed to sex positive. And if you're asexual, you can fall anywhere on that continuum, and that can also vary throughout your life course. So sometimes in your life you may feel more like you're sex repulsed, sometimes you're neutral, and sometimes you're positive. For some, they may stay continually on one end. It's all very different to the person. But those are kind of all of that. Not every asexual person experiences it the same way. Here's a little umbrella I made. So underneath the conveniently colored ace umbrella, there's a couple of identities here. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but these are all different kinds of experiences with asexuality. So for example, there's people who are demisexual, who they don't experience sexual, there's one, right? Yeah, we love it. Who don't experience sexual attraction until they've developed that deep emotional connection with a person. There are people who just identify as asexual under the ace umbrella. That would be me. There's people who, I think it's lithosexual, where they only experience sexual attraction up until the moment that feelings are reciprocated, at which point that's gone. So there's a number of different ways to be asexual, and none of them are the wrong way to do it. They are all just to the individual person. And showing this kind of heterogeneity of the asexual population, we know that, you know, someone is going to need counseling and at some point in time, and we should probably know about these things. So in the literature, there's a couple of really problematic quotes that I just like save every time I come across them. When a relationship lacks the presence of sex, it becomes difficult to define its components. So that's really talking about that a relationship without sex is hard to define as a romantic relationship. How do we tell what a romantic relationship is if not for the presence of sex? So for some people, it's quite confusing, hence the split attraction model. And from Losey, 20% of couples indicate that sex enhances vitality and satisfaction. However, when sex is dysfunctional, conflictual, or avoided, resulting in a non-sexual relationship, sex plays an inordinately powerful role, draining the relationship of intimacy and threatening marital stability. So I should be divorced by now, basically, if not have even gotten to the stage of being married, because yeah, it's been like over 10 years. We just got married, what, 2 years ago? Something like that? Yeah, I should be like super single by now. I'm not. And then talking comfortably with a romantic romantic partner about one's sexual needs and desires is an important component of relationship and sexual satisfaction. So not only does this quote say that sex is really important in relationships, it also assumes that romantic partners and sexual partners are one and the same, and they are not. If you saw one of the awesome talks earlier about kink that was going on, I think in the first floor, yeah, like it's not one and the same. And like the other talk about polyamory, same thing. There's many different kinds of things that can exist. And so for someone who was talking specifically about polyamory, what are the rules in your relationship regarding monogamy versus sex outside the relationship? As in, the only ways to have a polyamorous relationship is to have one that is based on having sex with other people. It could just be having another romantic partner as well, too. So what are the rules in terms of safer sex and practices with each other and others? So this is for successful or same-sex couples successfully coping with minority stress in re-envisioning family therapy and addressing diversity in clinical practices. So even though this was published in 2019 and does quite a good job at doing some challenging of specific concepts, it really embeds allonormativity into what we expect about the queer community that's also been at times problematically hypersexualized. I'm thinking like the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 80s and that kind of rhetoric. So there was this really helpful literature review. I love a good literature review, except for when they beat me to it. It's fine. But this contents analysis found that of sex therapy journals, 41.5% of them, which is pretty good amount of them, included articles that did not present the spectrum of asexual identity. So if they did include them, it was just asexual. That means one thing. 12.2% of the articles conflated sexual orientation and romantic orientation. I'm not surprised. And thankfully, 0% of them pathologized asexual people. However, so the DSM-5, which is what we use in North America, Canada, and the United States. I'm from Canada. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I am. So there is a female and a male sexual interest/arousal disorder. And it says in it specifically, if lack of sexual desire is better explained by one's self-identification as asexual, then a diagnosis would not be made. In the ICD-10, which is the version of that's used way more internationally, which I tend to prefer in general, but I digress, also still has hypoactive sexual desire disorder, which is just defined as the persistent lack of desire for sexual activity, and it's listed right next to the sexual aversion disorder in the coding. So this one's a little less inclusive, but I really think about this a lot when we talk about how in the DSM in Canada that homosexuality is no longer considered a disorder. And we always say, yeah, that's great. The queers aren't pathologized. It's not true. Like, you could still be diagnosed with it. And the fact that, just to bounce off the previous presentation, for a lot of services in Canada and the United States, you have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria in order to access any procedures or medications or anything like that. So it's for insurance purposes, but you don't need to have a diagnosis of any sort of dysphoria to get a mastectomy if you are a cisgender woman, for example. So consider that asexual people may experience distress related to their identity due to living in a society in which sex is considered compulsory. When we were looking just now at those hypoactive sexual disorders, one of the criteria is that you have to experience distress related to this lack of sexual desire. So people may experience distress that's not actually about their asexual identity. It's actually about the stress that they experience living as an asexual person in a society in which they're expected to. And then also that if people don't know about asexuality or have the words for it, they can't self-identify as being asexual and then can still receive that diagnosis. I didn't hear about the term asexuality until that one slide in my psychology undergrad, and that was the first time I knew that I wasn't broken and that there wasn't anything wrong with me, and that's just who I was. They don't talk about it in sex ed, but they don't talk about much in sex ed except bananas and condoms, So I've got a couple of little examples for you. I hope I still have time. We're good. Okay, cool. So Shay goes to their regular appointment to see their therapist. They want to talk about how they're struggling to tell their new partner about their asexuality. Shay has also never told their therapist that they're asexual either, so they go to get the support they need. They must also come out to their therapist. That's a really difficult situation, but not an impossible one that an asexual person could be in. Coming out to one's partner as asexual is really challenging. I actually haven't told my partner that we're married, that I'm married to, about that, but it hasn't been said in so many words. But even still, for some, it's something they want to put into words and say. So, unfortunately, Shay's therapist claims to be LGBT friendly, but thinks that asexuality isn't a real identity. Ace erasure is a big thing in the LGBT community, same with bi erasure. And the therapist suggests that Shay simply hasn't met the right one yet, and that maybe this new partner will be it. So we can see here that lack of training can really result in a really problematic situation for Shay. So Shay's trust in their therapist is now broken, and the therapeutic relationship is damaged. Shay is no longer closer to coming out to their new partner, and no longer feels safe with their therapist. So having an LGBT-friendly therapist is already really hard to find, but then you also have to find one that's informed about not just the very bare bones minimum that therapists should know about. Example 2, we'll do something a little bit more positive maybe. So maybe, we'll see. So Keo and Blair's adolescent child, Martine, has recently come to his parents about being asexual. Both Keo and Blair are supportive of Martine and his sexual orientation. However, they aren't sure how to talk to Martine about the importance of safe sex in a way that is still affirming of his asexual identity. They decide to talk to a family counselor about this to get support for these conversations. Safe sex is still a really important thing to talk to adolescents and young adults about, even if they are asexual, because again, when we think about that continuum that I presented earlier, people can vary on the ways and amounts that they experience sexual attraction. And so the answer isn't to simply not have that conversation, but to have it in a way that's informed enough to make sure they're not going to make their child feel like, actually, we support you, but like we don't quite believe you, so we're going to have this talk anyway. So thankfully, the counselor they see has taken plenty of time to learn about asexuality. She is able to provide them information on the asexual spectrum, like the one I presented to you earlier, and encourages them to talk to Martine about his identity. She also provides them with strategies to talk about sexual safety in a way that doesn't assume it will be a normal part of any or all of Martine's future relationships. Next slide. So that kind of leads us to some recommendations. Are we perfect on time? Nice. Okay, so recommendations I have, other than to burn it all down and start from scratch. So deconstruct compulsory sexuality. Romantic relationships can and do, I am proof of, thrive without sex being a core component of it. It's just something that is true. And when we talked about like reality, like was in the previous presentation, this is a reality, and it has been for many, many people. Generally, add more diverse LGBTQI+ content into coursework, and that's both in formal education and continuing education. I'd love to see it in post-secondary schools and people are learning to be therapists, but I think it's stuff that needs to be talked about in sex ed for kids as well too. Because again, if someone had told me what this was before, I would have gone a whole lot longer without thinking there was just something wrong with me. And then focus on communication and couple and family therapy rather than problematizing asexuality. So if it's a communication issue, it's not, oh, you need to go to sex therapy to increase your communication about that. There may be other communication issues that are at the root of it. And then finally, until more resources are added into formal coursework, is to seek out resources. There's a lot of really great ones online. ASPEC Meducation is a really good friend of mine who is a medical student in Australia who is ACE and ARO, and she's doing really incredible work on trying to find ways to include that into medical contexts as well. The ACE Dad is also really great, but there's tons online, and I think it's a really under-talked about identity that we need to talk about more. And that's me. I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you so much to Michaela. I hope everyone, including their mom, enjoyed the presentation. And last but not least is our last speaker, Daniela Crocetti, with reproduction and parenthood journeys of intersex and VSC people. So, Daniela, you have the floor.
So thanks everyone to arriving at this time of the day. I'm fairly exhausted, I imagine you all are. And as you can see, part of my team is based in Israel, and I would like to join the general call of the conference for ceasefire, a cease to genocide, and the general horrible situation that's going on. And know there are people on the ground in Israel protesting constantly what's going on. So, this presentation is a work in progress that is not going to focus as much on data because we don't really have much yet. We just started a few months ago. And so I'm going to sort of set the stage and talk about the project and give a little bit of an early overview of data, mostly from Italy and the Italian context. So for those of you who don't know, intersex and variations of sex characteristics are umbrella categories with a huge range of subjectivities and bodily variations that may or may not have consequences for biological reproduction. But many people with these variations have been subject to modifications of their sex characteristics in childhood without their consent, with often very traumatic consequences. And there's a huge range of technology in this field, terminology in this field, and in this presentation we're very specifically using the terms that people we talk to chose for themselves. So some of them may seem like pathological terminology, but these are also what people prefer. So when we saw the call for the conference, we were, we discussed amongst ourselves if it was reasonable for us to involve ourselves in the conference because many intersex and people with intersex people and people with VSC variations don't identify as queer. But at the same time, because of our focus on parenthood journeys and reproductive journeys, we really utilize queer studies and IVF immensely. And in 2009, Ian Moreland, who's a British intersex activist and scholar, started asking the question more specifically, what can queer theory do for intersex? Also because intersex has sometimes been inappropriately used by gender studies to sort of prop up the idea of gender plurality without direct representation. So in Moreland's investigation, he starts talking about the queer theory discussion of pleasure, shame, and touching specifically for people whose bodies have been unconsensually modified. And specifically also been stigmatized as out of the order of things, as disordered. But here also, when we're starting to talk about parenthood and reproduction, it's interesting to also add a little bit of thought about the ideas of queer failure, specifically when you're talking about bodies that are expected to fail in reproductive attempts. So, of course, we're drawing on all this scholarship on chosen families, reproductive rights, fertility, parenting, travel, regulations, but also obligatory couplehood. And so there are a lot of parallels, but a lot of the people we're interviewing do not identify as queer. So I'm going to provide you with a little bit of background on intersex rights struggles, terminology and boundaries, intersex and VSC in Italy specifically, and the scope of our research project, which is very wide-reaching. And I'm going to give you a little bit of theoretical framing based on Costello's reflections in 2011 on a sort of myth of intersex infertility, which is very specifically compounded by pediatric practices of sterilization and medicalization, which causes trauma. And so we're going to very, very quickly look at some of our emerging themes. I mean, we really haven't begun any data analysis at all, but with issues such as regulation, but also sterility as a diagnosis or diagnosis communication, the multitude of pathways that are afforded to and not afforded to different subjects opting out of parenthood, the relationship with trying to achieve parenthood and medical trauma, issues of intense desire and pleasure and emotivity around seeking parenthood, compulsory couplehood, and couplehood as a sort of interesting queer solution to maybe not being able to biologically produce yourself. Whoa, sorry. We initially consulted with stakeholders internationally as part of our project design, and we have an advisory board of international activists and advocates. We're conducting slowly semi-structured interviews with individuals who are pursuing parenthood or who are parents, but also medical professionals and policymakers. We have a technology focus, which is looking at uterus transplant, TC, which is sperm extraction, and also pre-implant genetic testing. And we also have country focuses, Germany, Israel, Italy, and the UK, extensive literature review, and also some action research in which we're working with the EU organization, OIE-EU, to map reproductive rights and access for intersex people across Europe. So as you can see, we've interviewed across our team 20 people now with a wide range of identifications, variations in a handful of different countries, and people have opted for a huge range of parenthood options. So intersex, VSE, are umbrella terms that describe a vast range of subjectivities, but also experiences, physical variations that may not or may not implicate a person's direct fertility capability. VSEs and intersex are largely invisible and relate to a wide range of innate biological attributes, which science has then gendered. So based on an individual's diagnostic experience, people might be subject to a wide range of human rights violations, particularly regarding the violation of bodily autonomy and integrity during their medical treatment in childhood, including surgery on their genital form, gonadectomy on their various reproductive organs, hormone treatments, but also a wide range of stigmatizing communication and invasive medical exams and photography, which have been compared to a form of medical rape. So, of course, these pediatric treatments may cause trauma, long-term pain, and or medical issues, impaired sexual pleasure, access to intimacy, mistrust of medical professionals, and infertility itself. Gonadectomy is a sterilization technique, as are certain forms of hormone treatments. So, in Italy, the vast majority of Italian medical specialists that I've interviewed describe medical practice as still involving early intervention to modify sex characteristics without the direct consent of the individual and often coercive consent of parents. As far as the social political landscape, I mean, as we were talking about, intersex, variations of sex characteristics are largely unknown and or completely confused with trans or genderqueer and other identities. This is compounded by the anti-gender ideology, which very specifically, and I feel intentionally, confuses and overlaps distinct categories of identity, sexuality, and the body. This we find in the 2019 document, but also yesterday they totally doubled down on it. And they also doubled down on the Catholic Church specifically doubled down on this perspective that variations of sex characteristics are a medical pathology, and therefore they should be corrected based on medical authority. So not based on individual autonomy. So in Italy, there is, here's the positive part, there's a growing range of activism, which includes more sort of social activism, but also patient advocates. And people here use different languages. Social activism uses intersex and VSC. Patient advocates tend not to use intersex, they'll use VSC or specific diagnostic terms. And there is now also a national coalition that creates a sort of collaboration network between a lot of these different realities, which last fall led to the drafting and publication of the Italian Declaration regarding intersex people and variations of sex characteristics. So a political document that's taking a position on intersex and VSC rights. And regarding parenthood, this document specifically asks for, among many other things, that the non-consensual sterilization of people with VSC be abolished, and that there be also funding of research on how to safeguard the reproductive capacity of people with VSC, and then also appropriate psychological support should be available for people with VSC who request it, particularly if they have to undergo, or if they have undergone traumatic or unnecessary medical procedures, which is related to the capacity to engage in further intimacy, eventual couplehood if one wants to, especially since obligatory couplehood is linked to access to many reproductive technologies. So, reproductive rights and the right to procreate, the right to become a parent is far from being resolved as a global policy issue. But however, it is really recognized as being an important policy theme with very strong emotional content. And this EU representative speaks very specifically in policy and emotional terms, saying infertility has deeply personal and heartbreaking resonance for so many Europeans. And it's not just about infertility, of course. It's not just about being able to become a biological parent. It's about being able to become a parent or create the types of families one wants to. So, Italy, very restrictive environment. Adoption is only for heterosexual couples, so not just heteronormativity, but also obligatory couplehood. Fostering children and special adoption form exceptions, but you have to live in a specific place that has a juridic structure that will support you. Reproductive technologies are available only for heterosexual couples. In that case, you don't have to be married, but you still have to be a couple, and it's practically free. But at the same time, anything beyond the basic treatment that goes out of a direct biological link, like gamete donations and sperm extraction, are not just added costs, but are like all of a sudden then way more expensive than any other part of Europe. Surrogacy, we all know, is not just not available, but also, rhetorically criminalized. And there's no embryo donation, and uterus transplant is currently in clinical trials. So in 2011, Carrie Gabriele Costello was sort of the first to present a sociological discussion of intersex parenthood and fertility. And he questioned the myth of intersex infertility, but also the pathologization in general of infertility, saying, my daughter was not a woman born. I was never of the female sex. I'm diagnosed as a true gonadal intersex. And what they want to address from an intersex perspective is the fact that many of us are actually capable of reproducing. In fact, doctors often take surgical steps to normalize our body to render us infertile. So he addresses sterilization, but also the pathologization of the possibility of the intersex body and the possibility of the intersex body being a reproductive subject. So several of our participants shared that their sterility was sort of the central facet of how their diagnosis was actively communicated them. This participant says they use this discourse of reproduction, that is, you cannot have children, to tell me it was a minor ailment compared to if they had found a tumor. It was an instrumental thing, but they didn't actually make a serious discussion about reproduction, so they didn't really offer options for future parenthood. And in many cases, this can be communicated when someone is really young, and as may be the case for adolescent girls who do not start menstruation, or the diagnosis might directly result from tests in the course of accessing reproductive technologies, which is how Klinefelter variation XXY has become understood as intensely common. The statistics range from 1 in 500 to 1 in 700 men. However, even in this context, the idea that people with VSC can't have children, of course, or even biological children, is obviously false. Okay. Returning sort of to the issue of emotivity and affect and desire, the majority of our participants really actively sought parenthood, while a handful became parents less intentionally through parents, and one accidentally through sex. But the idea of obstacles and options sort of accompanied them throughout their life. And I have to say there's consistently with all of my Italian interviews been a moment where we start crying, because it's just like the moment where they're like, oh my God, and then I was a parent. I mean, it's just like, it's really intense. In particular, this person describes their journey of thinking around doctors having told them they couldn't be a parent, and that this wasn't just about, they didn't think of themselves actually as a sterile person. They thought of themselves as fecund in an alternative way. Several of our parents talk very specifically about their negative medical experiences during childhood as a reason for avoiding reproductive technologies. In this case, our participants said they would not consider a uterus transplant because there was some point where they didn't want to be locked in a hospital again, which is a further barrier to parenthood for people with VSC. I'm going to skip this. We've had a lot of discussions today about obligatory couplehood, and this, of course, comes up because of Italian regulations. And this participant says very specifically, I don't understand why we are precluded from the possibility of choosing how to become a mother, how to become a parent, whether it's adoption, surrogacy, uterus transplant, whatever you want. A person who doesn't have a partner but would still like to become a parent is obstacled in Italy. So shifting focuses really quickly, we haven't totally addressed this yet, but I want to give you some data on uterus transplant. Uterus transplant is not for queers yet, but technically and as far as framework, it very possibly could be and is going to be an interesting area of juridic, social, cultural debate, I think. It started in Sweden and in clinical trials in the US in 2014. It's been practiced in clinical trials in Italy in 2017. Globally, it's still in clinical trials. In Italy, there have been 2 successful transplants and 1 live birth 2 years ago. But globally, it's still the art that's most restricted. Even in countries where single people and people in same-sex couples have access to other arts, uterus transplant is only available to people with XX chromosomes who are assigned female at birth, who are in a heterosexual couple, and able to use their own gametes to produce embryos. It's very restrictive. But in the future, I mean, both medical experts in the field who do this practice and bioethicists who have weighed in on the practice have expressed the potential positive impact and technical success for both endosex and intersex people with XY chromosomes. So, you know, this is a technological possibility for people with a huge range of bodies to experience pregnancy. It's extremely invasive, it's extremely costly, and bound to be extremely regulated. So in conclusion, intersex people and people with VSCs face additional obstacles to parenthood, especially if they're coded as infertile by their medical diagnosis. They might have also experienced traumatizing and sterilizing medical interventions in childhood. But as with a large chunk of the population, the people we talk to express a strong desire for parenthood and intense joy in being parents. Technology is rapidly expanding to be capable of addressing practical biological barriers to parenthood while still holding the emotional weight of uncertainty in any art practice. I mean, you don't ever know that you're actually going to be successful when you pursue a technological option. But intersex people face the same regulatory issues as everyone, but have these additional obstacles. So with the addition of these technological advancements, as we move into, you know, our envisioned, beautiful, scientific futures, it's clear that this rights gap for intersex people in VSC needs to be addressed in Italy, but also globally. So, thank you.